this is Alina. Welcome back to another video. This video is how to grow houseplants from seed part 2, which is a continuation from the first how to grow houseplants from seed video that we did like months ago, maybe half a year ago. Hopefully it's not going to be that long before the next video in that series. I have about 6 videos in mind for this series, so we'll see if it ends up being less or more than that. So in the first video we covered the greenhouse method using an actual greenhouse that you can purchase, or just doing a DIY method with a Ziploc baggie or something similar to that. And in this video we're going to be covering a few different germination methods. I actually have a blog post on this and it spells it out if it's better for you to see it in writing and just different photos. So I'm going to link that blog in the description if that is something that you want to check out. Otherwise, we're going to be covering 3 different methods in this video. The first one is the paper towel method. The second is a moss in a bag or perlite in a bag, vermiculite in a bag method, and then the third is water germination. These all have their uses. In general, most seeds will do perfectly fine for either the greenhouse method or the paper towel method, but if you really want to try out the other 2 methods that we'll also be covering, they can work pretty well. The kind of thing that I really want to stress in this video is be okay with experimenting. What a lot of this hobby is about is really trying out different methods and trying out different things and getting creative with it so that you can really figure out for yourself what works best for you, which method you just end up performing the best with, what seeds you find end up working the best with what method, and it just makes things a lot more fun, I think. And also, as you experiment, you really start to familiarize yourself with different germination methods. You're able to really get into those more advanced seed varieties and kind of develop that intuition that you want when germinating seeds, so that you can figure out like what can be going wrong and just be more successful overall in germinating your seeds and getting them to grow to adulthood. So the first method we're going to cover is the paper towel method. It is probably the most popular method that you'll see referenced alongside the greenhouse method. I personally love it a lot, and the times when I tend to use the paper towel method are for seeds that are just a little bit too tricky to use maybe with the greenhouse method. If I'm finding that there's just a seed that's a little bit too stubborn, I use the paper towel method. I just find that it makes sure that the seed gets the moisture that it needs a little bit better, and I also can keep an eye on the seed a little bit more. It's also a great way of testing the viability of a particular seed. If you, one of the things that can be frustrating about the greenhouse method is you put the seed in soil and you can't really find it when it's in the setup, so you don't know how it's doing. But with the paper towel method, you simply can go and look at the seed, check in on it, see how it's doing. Is it germinating? Is it starting to get moldy or anything? So that's a huge perk, and it is also very easy to do. I will have a little video here on how to do the paper towel method. The next method I want to cover is the moss in a bag, or perlite in a bag, or vermiculite in a bag method. You can also use soil if you'd really like to. It's basically a very similar method to the greenhouse method, using Tupperware or a bag to essentially just keep a lot of moisture and warmth sealed in and keeping the seeds in that mix. If you use a medium like moss or perlite or vermiculite, you can get slightly different results because of the way that they hold moisture differently. On top of that, the other perk is it can be quite a sterile environment as well. If you're using something more like perlite or vermiculite, you're creating a nice humid environment, trying to keep it as sterile as possible. It's great with getting that moisture in and keeping them in a sterile enough environment for a long time so that they have the time that they need to germinate. The final method that we're covering is water germination. It's not one that you see used a ton, but it is very interesting, and I think it's really fun actually, and just a fun thing to experiment with. Some of the more stubborn seed varieties just tend to do quite well with water germination. You just really have to stay on top of it and make sure that the water is sterile. Actually, one of the things that I kind of realized thinking about it recently is if you've ever grown sprouts, you're essentially doing water germination. They move a lot faster than a lot of the other seeds, like the tropical seeds that we're working with, can do. So I've actually done water germination with a couple of different seeds, and I've had varying degrees of success, but it is really, really fun when it actually works out. It's very simple to do, it's fun, so try it out. Now that we've covered the different germination methods, I wanted to talk a little bit about how to choose which germination method to use for a particular seed that you want to germinate. And the answer is really there's not any kind of specific rule. There are certain seeds that I personally find tend to do better with certain methods. For instance, I swear by germinating dwarf umbrella seeds with the paper towel method as opposed to the greenhouse method, because they are a particular seed that loses a lot of viability the longer that you have it in storage. They need to be planted fresh. However, that means that when you're trying to grow these seeds, you really need to make sure that you're hydrating them a lot before planting them. So actually pre-soaking them and then putting them in a greenhouse works great. I personally just like to use the paper towel method. I've had more success with that myself. A lot of the customers that reach out to us that have grown dwarf umbrella seeds love growing it with the greenhouse method and just you doing pre-soaking beforehand. That's just something to try out. Again, I want to stress, experiment, try out the different methods. My number one recommendation is if you have a seed that's just big enough, set aside some of those seeds to try with the paper towel method and maybe a couple of the other methods as well, and then do the others with the greenhouse method, because at the end of the day, you're probably going to be using the greenhouse method the most. It's just the easiest to set up. It's so consistent and you'll tend to get more consistent results that way. Try it out, see what works best for you, and you never know. The seeds that I would recommend are really, really good to try out with the paper towel method, at least the ones that we have in our shop, include Schefflera arboricola, which is dwarf umbrella, Fat Sage japonica, which is the Japanese Aurelia, China doll, Rhedomacra sinica works really well with that as well. Chlorophytum amaniense, or the fireflash plant, Philodendron psiloam, or Philodendron hope is another one that works great with the paper towel method. One of the downfalls with the paper towel method is you can get a lot of mold growth, especially if the seeds are contaminated beforehand. So what you want to do, if you see any kind of mold or fungal growth developing in your paper towel, you want to soak them in hydrogen peroxide, and that tends to sterilize them. So when you put them back in a clean paper towel, the seeds should remain sterile. And if you see that fungal or mold growth again, just repeat that same step. You should be able to see some growth after some time, which means that in terms of checking in on your seeds when you're doing the paper towel method, just check in maybe like once a week, maybe every few days, because you don't want to disturb the seeds too much. So have like a regimen where you're checking on them regularly, but not too regularly, because if you're opening the container that they're in, you're letting in all this colder air, you're changing the humidity conditions. And one of the most important things that you can do for seeds when they're germinating is to just leave them alone and leave them in consistent conditions. Now, in terms of the other methods, if you're doing moss in a bag or perlite in a bag, the seeds that tend to do really well with that are the ones that I mentioned before, are the ones with a really hard outer coating. They tend to be larger seeds. It's easier for you to find them when they're in that baggy method. So palms, cycads, trees, those all tend to have larger seeds that work quite well with that method. So definitely give those a try if you're trying to germinate one of those seed varieties. With water germination, again, you can basically do any of the seeds that I listed for the paper towel method. You usually want seeds that are a little bit bigger because, for instance, if you take polka dot plant seeds, they tend to be a little bit too small, and you can totally use the paper towel or water germination for polka dot seeds. It's just going to be a little bit harder to find and to work with and then to transplant. So that's something to consider for that. Final thing I want to cover is possible issues with these different germination methods. As I mentioned with the paper towel method, you can get a lot of fungal or mold growth just because it's humid conditions, it's a little bit darker in there. The best way that I mentioned you can counteract that is by soaking the seeds in hydrogen peroxide, and you can pull them out from the paper towel to do that, and just make sure that you're using a fresh, moist paper towel after that. The other thing to keep in mind with the paper towel method is you always want to make sure the paper towel feels moist, especially if you're maybe not zipping the Ziploc fully, or if you have it in a Tupperware container and that's what you're using. Make sure that it's fully closed because it seals in all of that humidity, and that's exactly what you want for the seeds. Just make sure it stays humid and try to check on it like once a week or so to make sure that there's not a lot of fungal growth. Dunk it in hydrogen peroxide if you do see it. With the water germination method, the key thing is to make sure that you're changing water very regularly. By that I mean at least once a day, because if you let the water get stale, you can get a lot of bad growth and just like rotting start to happen that way. So that's something to keep in mind. So that just about sums it up for this video. I hope you found the different methods interesting and helpful, and especially if you're struggling with any particular seeds, try out the different methods, see what works best for you, and let me know what kind of successes you've had as well and what germination method is your favorite. And if you have any other germination method suggestions that I haven't covered and just ideas that you have, that kind of makes the whole thing a lot more fun. The whole community is if we're sharing and exchanging the different ideas. So leave a comment. You can follow us on our social media. On Instagram is the one that we're the most active on. I'm constantly posting on there about my own projects and the different things that I'm up to with seedlings and germinating seeds and that sort of thing. So give us a follow on there. Let's see, give a like to this video, please subscribe. We are really working on trying to get these videos out more regularly, and the next one that we have planned is a lot of fun. It should have Jeff in it, so he's not just going to be behind the computer editing the videos and posting snarky comments, he'll also be in front of the camera, so that'll be a lot of fun. So please subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.